Good afternoon and welcome to the Tuesday, June 28th, 2022 Public Works Committee meeting. Now is time for a roll call and determination of quorum.
Evans. Here. Stroman. Here. Roberts.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Armstrong. Right here. A quorum is present.
Thank you. Now is time for adoption of the agenda.
Second.
Got a motion to adopt the agenda by Councilwoman Armstrong and a second by Councilman Jones. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Now is time for general public comment. This is a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue, not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. I don't see anyone for general public comment, so I will close it. We'll move on to consent items, items 1 through 16, and I will turn it over to Mr. Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give a brief summary of items 1 through 16. I do need to pull item 4 off of consent. We need to make a slight correction to the dollar amount before this committee takes action on that. So with that, I'll get started. Items 2 through 5 are change orders, standard order of business for the projects. Item 4 lists an amount of $2,250. We will be, that needs to be $1,350. So under separate consideration, please note that change. Item number 6 is a professional services agreement for easements and right-of-way acquisition on our Jackson Boulevard West Main Street project with HDR. They are currently the design engineers on that project and will be moving forward with acquiring easements and right-of-way as necessary to construct the project. Item number 7, agreement with FMG. They have done the preliminary design work on the Wonderland Drive area and will be requesting final plans for phase 1 of the project, biddable project. So this is a contract amendment to get us to phase 1 of final design of that Wonderland Drive reconstruction. Item number 8 is an amendment with HDR. As some of you may remember, some time ago we bid a project to repair a deep storm sewer located along Anamosa Street. We received no bids on that project. Met with city engineering staff and the consultant and have, I think, come upon a different design solution to do a slight redesign to make sure that it is constructible, and we will get a bid on it. This is an item that does need to be repaired. We believe this is a good way, so this amendment just authorizes and funds the additional work necessary by the consultant to effectuate those changes. Item number 9 is a request to advertise for bids for a 2020 MIP, we call it Miscellaneous Improvement Project. So about every other year we do a project to fix minor curb and gutter or fillets and pan. It's typically concrete work throughout the town. We package a project together so we can get more bang for our buck. So that's what this project is. Various locations throughout the city and nothing remarkable, typically small items. Item number 10 is a authorization for some roof replacements. There are 2 structures that we're requesting the roofs to be replaced on, or bid actually. One is the Dahl and the other is the Jackson Springs water treatment facility. One of the funding sources is through capital improvement buildings and the other is through our water funding for the Jackson Springs facility. Item number 11 is authorize staff to bids for the police department Southwest precinct improvements. I don't know any of the exact details of that. I think Rod Johnson may be able to answer questions later if you have something on that. Item number 12, authorized bids for well 8 pump recovery. Well 8 has been down for some time. We had hired a contractor that had issues on the project and ultimately had to pull off the project. So we've had to cash in the bond, and we'll be doing work to get that well back online. And item number 13, authorize staff to use emergency procurement authority per SDCL 518A9 to award a contract to Lane Christensen. I want to soften the word emergency. Well 11 is an important well to us, but we are not in an emergency situation as of yet. However, we do meet the threshold for the emergency procurement authority that we're requesting due to the long lead times, due to supply chain issues, and just where we're at in the community. We are having some operational issues with the well, but it is still functioning. We are still producing water out of that well. We just want to make sure that we are able to get this going as quickly as we can. The completion date on this would be October of this year. If we were to do a standard design bid build, it would be probably November before we could even bid the project, which means it would be project or construction into next year. So I think some of you may have received some calls on this item already. Just wanted to have that out there for you that today it's not an emergency. We're just trying to be proactive and get the well fixed and back online, producing to its full extent. Item number 14, advertise for bids for our street division for 2 trucks, budgeted item. They're smaller vehicles. Item number 15 is a request to prepare an H lot and have the city accept that H lot. I believe this is in relation to a development, and this is a 1/2 right-of-way issue. I'm not 100% certain on that, but you don't see many of these, but this is not an uncommon thing. Obviously, we recommend approval of that. And then the last item is a request to waive the requirement to install sidewalk along a certain property. I don't believe there are any properties in the vicinity, therefore staff's recommending approval of that. With that, I'll stand for any questions on items 1 through 16.
Mr. Jones, I believe you have a question. Oh, Laura, I'm sorry, it's not coming in here. Go ahead, Laura.
I just wanted to pull 11 and 13.
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions to Director Tech, if I may?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Tech, so item number, the emergency one, item number 13, will we still be able to, or will the contractor be able to purchase off pre-approved bids on supplies and items for that, or is it solely just what that company's going to need to do the project?
This includes everything. This is all the materials and supplies necessary. Wells are unique, depending upon how deep they are. There's a thing called a pump curve, so the pumps that are involved as well as the motors are unique. So they're not an on-the-shelf item, if you will. So with that being said, the instant this item is approved on Tuesday night, they'll start the paperwork with the manufacturers to get that pump and motor going, and so they can be manufactured and meet that October deadline to have everything replaced. And as I said, this includes all of the materials. A lot of the materials involved, such as the electrical wiring and piping, that is all standard off-the-shelf items that the company can easily procure.
If this were to be a typical bid project, are you comfortable with this price that we're seeing?
Yes. This company actually has done a lot of well work for us. In fact, earlier in the agenda, you see that there's some change orders in there. So they have done a lot of our workforce and have done a great job.
Okay, thank you. May I continue? You may. Thank you. Item 15, I've been here 2 years, but I guess I'm still the new guy. What's an H-lot?
An H-lot is a term used for a highway lot, and that is for public right-of-ways. So typically you take private property, and if you create an H-lot, you are creating public right-of-way. So that is what an H-lot stands for.
Thank you. I've been told to get the H out of here before, but I didn't think it was the same thing. Item number 11, who should I address that to, the advertised bids for the Southwest Precinct renovation?
Rod Johnson, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Would be the appropriate person.
Mr. Johnson, thank you. So we've had communication as this group and also the council that when projects are like this are getting ready to go to bid, we would like to see what might be coming our way before the project just goes out for bids. Is there anything on paper right now of a rough drawing estimate of anything of what it might be looking like? So we might know what to expect when it comes forward?
The plans are in design right now, but we could certainly provide a presentation to you before the project is bid.
Well, I just, oops, sorry folks. I know at our last Public Works meeting, we talked about the City Hall Phase 2 renovation project that we were asked to authorize to bid, but we didn't have any idea what we were bidding on. And so instead of this going the direction of where we're going to be able to see things, it almost appears like it might be, and not on purpose, but going the other direction. So I know I, for one, would like to see a little bit more what we might be paying for before we just approve going out for bids. Or is that the cart before the horse? I'd like to hear from my colleagues. And I'll reserve my time if I may, Chairman.
Yes. Mr. Evans?
You know where I stand on this kind of procedure, this process. I think it's flawed. I don't think any government agency, I know the schools district certainly doesn't, when you're spending the public money, trusting that they're going to do the right thing until you actually see what you're buying. And when they don't do that, we see problems happening, like this particular book thing, when the due diligence was not done in the proper fashion, problems come down the line. Now, I don't know when I see this, what it's being spent on at all. Is it just a collection of beer fridges? I mean, it could be. So I don't think this is a big ask. I think we need to change the procedure so that we actually see an itemized list of what we are paying for with the public's money. This is not abnormal process. I think it's a normal process followed in most places. I don't know how you got in the habit of approving things until they're ready, they're done. I think we just heard Mr. Johnson say they don't really have the plans, but we're sending it out for bid already, right? Did I misunderstand that?
I think you
So
misunderstood
that
that.
doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, you
It
did.
really doesn't.
You did misunderstand that. We're asking for your authorization right now. When I say the plans aren't quite ready, it means that we don't have them in a position where we can make them available to the public.
Then why are we asking
complete.
for anything until they're done, ready to present? Then we go to the next step, which is authorizing for bid, doing that. It just seems we're out of sequence. Does that seem logical? Or maybe I might be mistaken, I guess. I'm a new government person. I've only been doing this 3 years. But this process has never been making sense to me. It wouldn't make sense if I were running a project and owning it myself. I would demand to see, what is your program? What am I spending money on before I give you the check? I don't think anybody would run their household that way, and we certainly shouldn't be running this household that way. So that's where I'm coming from on that. The same topic's going to come back in number 17.
Well, and if I may, Chairman, thank you. That's kind of where I'm at too, because we're authorizing to go out for bids on the precinct renovation. But standing right here, and we're not beating up Mr. Johnson. He's the poor guy that's up at the microphone right now. We're discussing process, not people. So please don't take any of this as an attack on you, Mr. Johnson, nor anyone in the room. We're talking about process here. I know we sit up here and, you know, it's not a matter of do we not trust our people. You know, I trust everyone that is involved with these processes 100%, but business is business. And to authorize to go out for bids for the precinct renovation, which is going to be a big project, without any introduction or concept of what, you know, it might look like, Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, I guess I'm just not comfortable with. I think I would feel a lot better if we knew what the initial thoughts were, so we could at least see it and put in our 2 cents worth, and then, you know, be more prepared to send it out for bids. I could not talk to a constituent and tell them what we're going out for bids for, except it's the Southwest Precinct renovation for the Southwest Police Station. I couldn't tell them how many square feet we're looking at, 1 floor, 2 floors, how many vehicles, or anything like that. And I don't think that's micromanaging on our part. I think it's managing our resources and being prudent with what we're going to authorize to spend. So I guess, and yeah, I mean, I'm going to have the same comments on item 17 as well. So I guess I would rather we had at least an introduction before we, you know, have the wedding. We got to have a little engagement period here before we actually consummate this thing. So would that be possible? We could reach out to the police department for some kind of a presentation? And how do we do that? Do we just say,
Go ahead, Mr. Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, certainly we can get the PD and provide, there's no risk in my opinion, of moving this forward, but certainly at the next Public Works Committee meeting, we can have an item on the agenda where the PD or a representative of the PD can give you an overview of the project with drawings and pictures and all of that. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. And then as far as moving forward's concerned, you know, these items to request, you know, authority to advertise for bids doesn't mean it's happening tomorrow. This is just a procedural step that our finance department and other procedures have been in place for years and years and years that this is a step we have to do before we advertise for bids. It seems to me like in the recent past here there have been requests to, well, what is it? What are we actually looking at? And I think perhaps moving forward that a presentation can be given along with this request of what actually is, what it looks like, what the scope of the project is. Keep in mind that when we enter into design contracts, the original funding request for a lot of these projects, a lot of that scope is already known, and that's discussed. For instance, this precinct, it's merely just creating office space within that building. It's the outside of the building's not going to change, but certainly it would be helpful, it seems, to this board to have a look at least schematics of what's happening.
I certainly feel that way, and I think we would be able to keep our constituents much better informed as we move forward with projects if we could do that. So thank you, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate you stepping up to the microphone on a whim like this. Thank you, Director Tech.
Councilwoman Armstrong, you have the floor.
I want to commend my colleagues for voicing their concerns when we do this, and some of them have been repeated concerns over the last 3 years. If I may, can I address Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson, for those of you, for those people that are maybe watching, can you walk us through, not just, well, how about this particular project? We don't want to micromanage. Our job as a body is to oversee the operations and let the professionals do their jobs. I get that. But for those of you that are watching, how do we walk through? What is the proposed timeline? So we start today by hopefully passing this. Of course, it goes to City Council on Tuesday. If you don't mind just kind of baby stepping it, because I think it will also show not only in this particular matter, how we do the process, but how we do the other processes with other projects.
Sure. So once the advertising authority is approved by council, then that puts us in a position where we can advertise, and typically that's done on a weekend. It might be the next weekend, it might be a week, 2 weeks later, whatever, I guess, whatever time frame is dictated. But so once we advertise, we're actually required to advertise twice in the local paper. So we advertise on consecutive Saturdays. And then, it also goes to, some of the, like CIC, some of those sort of things that makes it, and also goes through our public purchase software, makes it available, so that all contractors know on the same date when a project is available for bids. The advertising time, the time between then and bidding, that can vary, and it depends upon the complexity of a project. We're required to advertise at least 10 days. Typically, it's 2 to 4 weeks. Sometimes it can even be a little bit longer, again, depending upon the complexity of the project. But then when it's advertised, a bid date is set. It's typically on a Tuesday here, a Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock prior to the week prior to a council meeting. And then that's when you see it for the first time, is at that's when you see the bid amount, those
That's when
bids.
it comes to Public Works.
No, that's when it goes to council.
So it goes straight to council,
A bid
okay.
goes directly to council.
Okay. So it's out there for probably about 30 days. That was my general understanding. Obviously, it would, depending on the complexity of a
Right.
project. So
Right.
since this is not a brand-new project, we're just kind of remodeling. Is that a fair assessment? The internal,
Yeah. I think bid authority was somewhere around $160,000, $180,000. So it's not a small project, but it's not that complicated. There's no site work involved. There's really no structural involved. It's just renovation of the interior space.
so when the bid is accepted, let's say it's 30 days from now, it would be sometime in August, beginning of September,
Yes.
and then we go to that October time frame that Director Tech was talking about?
That was a different.
Oh, that was a different project, okay. So we have the bid set, accepted. Then at what point do we continue with this?
Well, the bid isn't accepted until it comes to the council. The
Okay.
council is the ones that, that approve the bids. Once it's approved, then, we enter into, a contract with the successful low bidder. And, that takes a little bit of time. Usually between then, you make sure that you've got all your bonding in place, so on and so forth. Usually by the time, that can take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, I would say, to get that, to get all that information in place. Then we issue a notice to proceed, and that's when the construction begins.
And what is the anticipated completion date of this, or we won't know that until we have the bids?
No, we will set that date, but a project like this, and again, we're talking about the Southwest Precinct building, it's interior work, so it's a project that you ideally want to have out in front of contractors for winter construction. So we would be looking at, winter, spring construction for this project.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Let's let Greg go, and then I'll call on you. Greg, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate what my colleagues are saying up here, and I tend to agree with them, and I also appreciate the explanations from Director Tech and Mr. Johnson. But just for an example, I'm looking at this request for advertising authority, and it says, here's the project item description. Quote, renovation of former Security Bank building at Sheridan Lake Road and Catron Boulevard. I'm assuming that there must be something more specific for, if I'm going to bid on this, there has to be something more specific, isn't there, that I can look at and say, well, here's what they're wanting done, this is what I think I can do it for, and then submit my bid. And it's the same thing with number 17. It just says renovation of City Hall, second phase. That doesn't tell me what I'm bidding on. It doesn't tell me what the job is. And that's where I think I'm getting disconnected. And I'd like to see something more substantial or definitive about what goes into these things before we, know whether to accept a bid or not. So that's my point. I don't know if you have any comment to that, Mr. Johnson, but go
Well,
ahead. I yield.
I mean, I could have certainly given more information, in that summary. But really, until you have a full set of plans, a full set of specifications, you don't have what you need in order for someone to put a bid in for a project. So, and you don't really, that's really not available until you've advertised. So I think, then it's, okay, we're in between, how much information do you want? Because you probably don't want a 200 sheet set of specifications. You probably don't want, 30, 40 sheets of plans, mechanical, electrical, so on and so forth. So I think it's, question of what information would be helpful for the council as a whole.
You can, absolutely.
Thank you, and you're right, I wouldn't want anything in that detail because, as Ms. Armstrong said, we're not here to micromanage, and we do trust our engineers, and we think they do a great job. It's just that, I guess somewhere in the middle, between something as general and broad as this to something that's more specific without being the actual definitive plans. When this came up at the last Public Works meeting, I think the next day, Chief Culberson sent us all some drawings and things like that about the firehouse renovation, which helps to just understand a little more specifically what's going on. So that's my input on that. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Tech said there's really no harm in this process the way we do it, but I'm going to give you a specific example concerning a major project that may not have passed had we had all the details now. And it's a process that your heart and soul was in, and that was the stadium project. Because we were assured this would be a multi-use thing, but without seeing the actual design things, parameters, it turns out there's a permanent AstroTurf mound, which makes it unusable for other activities. That would have changed the vote up here in about 4 cases. I'm telling you, because it's been a lot of talk, and so that was never discussed. We didn't get that detail, which would have maybe affected the vote, and we could have maybe altered that particular detail of the project to make a lot of people happy. So the baseball people are happy, I'm happy because I like baseball, but the other people that plan on using it are unhappy. These are the details that we could perhaps intercept and fix before they're set in stone. So I do think there's a problem with the process in that we approve it and then you say, well, you approved this. But we didn't really approve that because we thought we were approving something else. And so that's the problem with the way we're doing it now. And we can solve these future problems by delaying this bid thing a little bit till we actually see what we're voting on. That's the reason I want to change this. Thank you.
Mr. Tech?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's confusion, I believe, on everyone's part about what the process really is. So I will bring forward to this committee a presentation about step-by-step process and how a bill becomes a law, how we get from the very beginning concept to an actual finished project. So I think that will be helpful, not only for the public, but for this committee and other elected officials as well. So I'll put that on my list of things to bring forward to this committee.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's no other questions. I'll look for a motion on consent items 1 through 16. Yes, yes. Did you still want to pull 11 and 13? Okay. We have a motion from Councilwoman Armstrong to approve items 1 through 16 minus item 4, and a second by Councilman Jones. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Item 4, approve change order number 3F to Lane Christensen Company for well number 5, pump replacement and electrical improvements. Well number 6, pump replacement and electrical improvements, project 20-2574 and 21-2640 for a decrease of $2,250.
Correct.
Yes, but you need to make that motion. Make that motion to change 2250 to... And if I can get a second? So we have a motion on item 4 from Councilman Jones, a second from Councilman Stroman. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Now on to consent items 17 and 18. I will open public comment. I don't see anyone that wants to speak, so I will close public comment. We'll move on to item 17. Authorize staff to advertise for bids, City Hall Phase 2 renovation project, project number 2675/CIP number 51225. And Mr. Jones, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So as I follow the links here to go and get the information as we've been taught to do, I go to the link for item 17, authorize staff to advertise for bids, City Hall Phase 2. Then I go down to the bottom and I hit project map. That, when I did it before, it just took me to a previous city council agenda. It didn't take me to any kind of a project map or anything, so I don't know, maybe that was just an oops. Oh, now I have a map, okay. So do we have any more information as to what will be taking place other than just this map? Who, Director Tech, perhaps? Mr. Johnson, perhaps?
So we set up a special meeting, did a presentation to council representation a few months back, and described the project at that time, had some video information, so on and so forth. And that's basically what we have been building on as far as the plans and design go. The project involves work specifically in this room, and then also in the lobby. And then there's also some fairly minor office renovation work that's being done. No outside work. You know, we can certainly bring back that presentation to the next Public Works meeting. Nothing has really changed from that meeting. Maybe some fairly minor things. We talked about at that meeting. We talked about the window behind you being removed, replaced with a solid wall that would become a video wall. And there was certainly some, some opposition to that. The other thing that, I stated at the time is I said, look, we'll make this into a, this will be an alternate. Because quite honestly, when you budget something, in this case, 3 to 5 years ago, you do have some budget concerns. So we're probably going to have 3 or 4 alternates, and that will be one of them. So, from a budget standpoint, that's important to me. And if the council has objection to what we're proposing, then it'll be your decision.
So would you have time to do a presentation at the next city council meeting with each of the addendums, or would that need to be at our next Public Works meeting? Because I know, I was at those meetings. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I'm still not satisfied as to what we're getting. So I would like to see a little more detail, especially the addendums, because if I don't recall us talking about any addendums at that meeting. I think it was the presentation, and that was that, which is what spurred a lot of conversation and question. So would we want to see this at the Public Works or at the next council meeting?
I guess that's a decision this body could make. I'm fine with it at Public Works. Then we can see it beforehand, before it goes to the council, but.
Well, and that would be my preference, is that we saw it here first. So if we had more questions or needed more clarity, we could have it, and that's the purpose of this group. That's the purpose of Legal and Finance. That's the purpose of Public Works, is to delve into these things a little more deeply so it can get to council a little more prepared and ready for action. So I guess I would make a motion then that we table item 17, or continue item 17 to the next meeting, and in anticipation of a presentation from, would it be you, Mr. Johnson, or someone in your department, or so I can word my motion properly?
Yes,
Just a presentation about.
I'll be here.
Okay, thank you. About the project, and with, quite a bit of flesh on the bones, so we can really know what the proposals are and what the addendums are. Okay.
Okay, and when you say addendums, I think you mean alternates.
So here's a question real quick, if nobody minds me stepping.
Alternates.
Can I second his motion?
Well, I'd like to speak real quick, if you don't mind. So, Mr. Johnson, the reason I suggested Public Works was because I wanted to give you a little more time to put this together. But is there any problems with pushing this off again? I mean, is there any time frame that we want to be able to get this bid out? Is there any time, because this is another project that will be great for the winter time too. We're going to get better bids if we do it, a little later in the fall or in the winter than if we do it right now, as busy as everybody is. But I'm just curious, what works best for you?
I don't think that 2 weeks is going to be detrimental to the bid time. So I'm fine with that. We'll get something prepared. We have some information that we presented earlier, but we'll try to expand on that a little bit without dragging it out too long.
Well, going to the next Public Works meeting definitely gives you a lot more time than coming to the next council meeting. So, anyway, if someone wants to make the motion.
I did.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We also have Mr. Evans. You have the floor if you still want to speak.
Thank you. Now, I believe that part of our next year's budget is to include a media, social technology expert. Am I correct in my discussions with the mayor? Is that not part of what we're planning on including in the future budget? To me, to waste any money on any systems that person may come in and reject out of hand is foolishness, because they may not want a video wall, which, if you've ever been in sports bars, becomes a technology nightmare when it starts to malfunction. When this works just fine for its purpose and costs the taxpayers nothing, if we upgraded that for 10 or 15,000, we could change this without changing anything. So to do all this and act now without the person who's going to be in charge of it, that just seems like a foolish pursuit to me and a waste of the taxpayers' money. Now, there's an obsession with this wall for whatever reason, which I find as an architect who graduated number 2 in their class of 400, so I wasn't a bad design student. I find it to be the best feature of the building. It's never used for whatever reason, but and the next mayor may love this feature. I can think of one who would use it every day because I've talked to him about it. So to rush and change this for a mayor that's going to be going and gone when it's finished, again, is a fool's pursuit. So some of these things we're after for something like a pit bull that's latched onto an idea. We need to get them out of our head and go back and look at piece by piece what we need to do. Security issues. We've lost our safe room. How are we going to secure this? And we lost that safe room because nobody asked people what the reason for that door was into a room that had no windows. Gone. Just like we lost our community room, a door with access to the outside that had public restrooms that you could unlock and people could come in and view stuff. Gone from the design of the building, which was a well thought out feature. Those features no longer exist because somebody didn't think of what they were there for. Well, I would have thought of it had you asked me and pointed it out, but I don't know as it would have done any good because it seems that we get set on these ideas in this process I keep questioning, and we never vary because the minds are made up. And that's not efficient government as far as I'm concerned. It's a good way to waste the taxpayers' money undoing problems that were done by last year's council. So I think we need to see an itemized list, and we need to see, we're going to spend this much on that, and this much on that, and this, and the council can decide, we don't want to do that, and we don't want to do this. Those other ones seem like a good idea. Once we approve remodeling something, we never see it until it's too late. So there's no feedback. That is a flawed procedure, and we need to stop doing it that way because it leads down a road that we may not be wanting to go down. All right? We need to have some checks and balances here, and that's the reason I'm always on this design process. So just my 2 bits. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Armstrong. Go ahead. You can go to, you were in the queue first.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for bringing the point up about kicking the can down the road. Is it going to cause any problems with delaying this? So that being said, I don't want to look like we're picking this project apart, but I do think it's important that we air our concerns about details or the procedures. For 2 years, I've been asking for enhanced security in these chambers. Just for the safety for our constituents, the guests, of course, for elected officials. This room is antiquated for that. And I would hope that somewhere in this phase 2, we can prioritize that. Asking for safety and security for 2 years, that shouldn't happen. And I know at most times we have police officers here. We don't today. I just think it's important. People need to feel safe in these chambers. And I can't speak for my colleagues, but there have been times where I was very concerned about all of our well-being. So if at all possible, I would like to put on the record that I would like some safety measures put in place in these chambers.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert?
Just a couple of points. First, to alleviate any concern about the person who
if the position is approved, would be in as a media specialist. As I understand that from the mayor, this kind of stuff would probably fall more under buildings and grounds. The media specialist would be in the booth, but the display of this would probably not fall within there. From a technical standpoint, what we plan to do in here will work either way with a video wall, if that happens, or a projector. So when we talk about additions and things that we're going to do in here, we are not AV people, so we would require some of that input through the bidding process to know exactly what we're going to be doing in here. And from our standpoint, from an IT standpoint, getting the ones and zeros to whether it's a video wall or a projector is just a route. So we're comfortable in that regard, but certainly an AV person who would be part of that bid process would provide us with the guidance we would need to decide what the best way to get the pictures on the screens would be.
Thank you. If I have no more questions from the dais, we have a motion to continue this to the next Public Works meeting by Councilman Jones, and I can't remember who made the second. I think Mr. Stroman did. So we have a second by Councilman Stroman. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item 18, a resolution of road name change to change St. Cloud Street to St. Paul Street for property generally described as being located on St. Cloud Street from 5th Street to 2nd Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vicki.
So at your last meeting, you continued this item for 2 weeks, and Lon and I did get a chance to meet with the gentleman from the neighborhood, Spencer Crawford, and we also had Roger Hall join us at the meeting from Public Works. Roger described in detail the scope of the street project, which then fell into place why the different name changes were needed as proposed originally. Lon, could you kind of pull up the graphics and go through that for everyone? Just note that at the end of our meeting, when we did visit with Spencer Crawford, who was just such a wonderful person to even get to know, he did come on board with the street name change as we had originally proposed, and hopefully this will help explain why. Lon?
Okay, so first, this is my first time addressing this committee. Introduction, I'm Lon Schnittgrund in Building Services, and was tasked with addressing upon the retirement of Brad Solon, the old building official. So that's why I'm here today. As we see up here on the screen, this is the initial proposal from St. Cloud to St. Paul Street. Pull up this aerial map here. And this kind of shows a little bit of the scope of the project. There will be a total of 18 parcels that are affected upon the southern portion of St. Cloud, along the southern portion here between 5th Street and 3rd Street. Oh, that's just, but what we clarified with the engineering meeting that we had, the St. Paul Road name change was going to be necessary because there's actually not access to 5th Street. There will be a retaining wall, and so the only access to St. Paul would actually come from Franklin Street through the alleyway, and I've got another picture of that here. The alleyway from Franklin going up to what would be proposed as St. Cloud, as well as the reconstructed intersection that connects St. Paul all the way down to 2nd Street. So the duplicative nature of two St. Clouds was the reason why we needed to have a road name change proposed. And St. Paul at that time was what was agreed upon, and that would show the extent. The initial idea from Mr. Crawford was to change St. Cloud up to from Fifth Street up to what is Signal Drive. I don't have that quite on my map here, but as you can see, St. Cloud will run all the way from Fifth up the hill towards Signal. We entertained that. We took a meeting with Mr. Crawford, and I wish he would have shown up today, because he, after our discussions, he was satisfied that we had made the right decision going with the St. Paul, and he wasn't opposed to St. Paul as the name of the street either. So that's kind of where we stand. The proposal has not changed. We are still looking to rename that section to St. Paul.
So the yellow line is just meant to show you how that retaining wall ties in with that termination, so that you cannot in the future get from St. Cloud from the west to St. Paul. They will not connect. And that's the visual I needed to see to understand why it made sense that this is the leg that was being renamed to St. Paul.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions for Director Fisher and Mr. Schnittgrund, if I may. So please, this map that's up here right now, this is very good. So would you put your marker or whatever where Fifth Street is, please?
Fifth Street runs right on the very west end of the photo here.
Okay. Now, if we go on Fifth Street, where does it quit being, rephrase, does St. Paul Street not start until this light area that's identified as St. Paul?
That's correct. There will be, the retaining wall at this area here where the yellow line indicates eliminates Fifth Street access to St. Paul. Now, as you come down Fifth Street, this street here is Franklin. They are going to be reworking the alleyway between these structures, and the intersection here at Third Street is going to be rebuilt as well.
Okay.
So the access would come through the alley as well as up Third Street, and that would be the access points to St. Paul.
So the people who, if you can take your marker and go left to right from Fifth Street over to where it changes from the dark to the light, and that little curve is there identifying St. Paul. Mm-hmm. St. Cloud is still the original St. Cloud. So is this down here also St. Cloud?
No.
So is that St. Paul?
St. Paul. Everything east of Fifth Street on that lower leg is
Okay.
St. Paul. It's a
All right,
standalone
so
street.
the first question that I asked then, I did not get an accurate answer. My question was, is St. Paul only the little area that's light where it says St. Paul? And the answer I received was yes. But that is now not the correct answer. Does St. Paul come off of Fifth Street?
Correct. In essence, it won't actually come off of Fifth because you can't access it from Fifth. It will
Okay.
come off of the southern legs that Lon has shown on two different occasions from
Okay,
the
so
alley.
we've got two different answers on that question. Where does it quit being St. Cloud, coming off Fifth? Where does it quit being St. Cloud and start being St. Paul?
Doesn't.
Go ahead.
Blocked off. It doesn't come off of Fifth.
I'll show the little more detailed. This picture right here would indicate Fifth Street on the west side again, and St. Cloud coming from west to east continues as it is currently laid out up to Crescent on top of the hill. St. Paul would begin here, and I don't know the dimensions, approximately maybe 100 feet from Fifth Street is where St. Paul will start. And this indicates the alley that between Fifth Street and Third Street that will be renovated. And then it continues then to the east, and we haven't got a picture quite far enough to show that intersection, but that's continuing on all the way down to Second Street.
Okay, thank you. Now, can you go back to the one previous to this one, the slide that you had up? It's like Director Fisher said, she said that one helped her wrap her head around it. That one's helping me. So,
There we go.
there we go, thank you. So if you turn off of Fifth if you turn, you're going north on Fifth, you turn right, you will be on St. Cloud.
Correct.
And then you'll either continue on St. Cloud, going toward the way St. Cloud is, or you'll veer to the right and you'll be on St. Paul.
No, you cannot go to the right. There will be a retaining wall, and it will prevent you from going to St. Paul.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes, that's
So-
what we've been trying to say. Well, my
Well, and-
apologies, we haven't made it
Well,
clear.
and that's okay, and we're getting there in different manners, and I understand. But that's why I want to be clear. So there's no access from Fifth Street to St. Paul? Either way. You can't go from Fifth to St. Paul?
Right.
You can't go from St. Paul to Fifth?
Correct.
Okay. Do we have ample emergency access for emergency vehicles responding since they can't come off of Fifth?
This is their preference. The answer, they have indicated that they would prefer that this have an alternate name. It will then designate to 911 responders that they can't get there from Fifth Street, that it'll be in the system that the GPS won't take them there from Fifth Street.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just step in 1 second? Thank you. I think the way to really clear this up is this is an east to west road that has no access on either the east or the west. It's like having two cul-de-sacs. So you're coming up the middle, you're going one way, you're going the other. The only difference is if you go to the west, you actually have access there too, down to Franklin Street. But on both the east and the west side, there's no access to any roads, and there's also no access to St. Cloud. So, pretty simple. Anyway.
There's my non-engineering drawing of it, two cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, I see that.
I thought you'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Vicki. Go ahead, Bill, I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to say that makes sense, and what Mr. Roberts just said makes sense. But the reality is, in the world of cartography, and if you buy any Rand McNally map for any city in the world, it'll say Oakland Street, F1, F4, F7, F12. Clear across these gigantic metropolitan areas, it's always F, because it's always that street in the same line. So people find it that way. Now, we're living in an age where people do this, and I guess it directs them where they're going. But this is not really traditional map drawing and naming. And, you know, there are billions of examples out there that show this is not normal. That's in a grid, and if you study the design, the way brain functions in a human, they recognize patterns before they recognize colors and anything else. So these little variations with the brick wall that's going to block it off, the brain is still seeing St. Cloud Street going east, and there may even be another extension of St. Cloud clear out there where the trailer courts are. I don't know. But in my ward, there's lots of these little chunks of streets that are non-continuous, but they're all lined up with where it's coming from. So I see this as really bad design because I think it's illogical, and granted, there may have been some input, but to me it doesn't make any sense, and all of the inconvenience that goes with renaming all of those and getting your checks printed and getting all your things transferred to new names is not worth the fuss you're making for those homeowners unless we're agreeing to pay for it. Are we going to pay for that, all those things for all those people? That probably isn't a good idea. To me, it makes more sense to end St. Cloud there and have that all be Signal Drive, so it's one name from there, clear over, and it comes out on the other end, rather than have a couple blocks of windy St. Cloud that all of a sudden, are we going to change the name at the top of the hill so it's St. Cloud all the way? See, none of this makes any sense to me. It makes more sense to keep St. Cloud on the straight, in the grid. If you're designing a brick building and you run out of bricks, the pattern's more important than the color. You notice the grid, that's the way our brains work. So I think this is a bad idea, and I'm going to vote against it because it's, to me, illogical. Because somewhere down there, there's probably another I was saying, West St. Look at all those streets that end at the Gap or end at the Hogback. All of West St. Anne, all of those streets, they do what you're saying. We find those addresses. But when you look at the map, F1, oh, there it is. F12, it's going that way. You know, Main Street in Lincoln is 50 miles long, O Street. It doesn't change despite the gaps. Goes all the way from Kearney, you know, it's crazy how far it goes to the Missouri River. That's kind of the way things are done in the world. So this to me, I'm going to vote against it because it's illogical. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might. So St. Cloud Street comes up, and it does transition to Signal at that location. These streets do not, Signal and this road do not connect now, nor will they in the future. We did bring forward this road request. We concur with what Councilman Emmons is saying. There's a science behind street names. And our Emergency Services Communication Center has identified that this is the leg that should get renamed for Emergency Services Response Security. And they also are in support of St. Paul. In visiting with Spencer, who was at our last meeting, he did come on board with it because of the lack of continuity to Fifth Street. He also was in high support of the name St. Paul. We have been available if anyone from the neighborhood did have questions. We're here to help them. We can't pay for the expense of getting new checks, even though I don't know if a lot of people still use them today. But we'd certainly help them with any direction they needed to make sure that those address changes were forwarded to all of their institutions as should be. So it is our recommendation that it does get named St. Paul, and that is in hopes of meeting 911's response security concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, you have the floor.
Move approval of item number 18.
We have a motion and a second, and I just want to step in for just 1 second, if you don't mind. You know, I've been on the council for a while now, and this is only the second, I think, name change I can think of since I've been on the council. And this one, I can see why it happens. I can also see Mr. Evans' point here, but this was a bad design to begin with. I mean, we're just working with what we have. So I think that the city staff did a great job on what they did here. I think they're going to increase the safety. I know the neighbors are probably going to be happy because it is going to cut down some of the traffic in there too. I mean, people like to live on cul-de-sacs, and now, you know, they basically have it. And the check thing, Bill, I've had checks with my old address for 2 years that I've still been writing. I just, you know, just blank out the address and write in the new one. But I get it. People don't like change. The last time we went through this, there were some of the neighbors that were upset, but it was the same thing. It had to do with public safety. And when they realized that, there wasn't quite as much of an issue with it. So, you know, this was one we really didn't have much to work with in the beginning, and I think the city staff did a great job with it. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. We have a motion, and we have a second. We have a motion by Mr. Jones, and I didn't get the second by Councilwoman Armstrong. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much. It passes anyway. And yes, if I can get a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you.